The obelisk. The obelisk is the key.
Good evening and welcome to the Obelisk. Tonight's guest is Dave Zed from the Generation Zed podcast. I don't have any more of a bio from him, so he'll have to do it himself. Welcome, Dave. Pleasure, very big pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so
Dave.
much. Thank you so much for having me.
We're in the shadow of Mercury retrograde, and I do feel it myself. I know Jerry calls it Kool-Aid, but I just wanted to say, not tonight, Jerry. Can I get an amen from everyone out there? Jerry always calls Mercury retrograde Kool-Aid.
No, I call it Gatorade.
Oh, Gatorade. Okay.
But that's a joke. I still understand and respect
Jerry,
it.
you need a tampon tonight. You really do.
I'm going to shut up.
You're a modern woman tonight. Anyway, and I don't want you to shut up. I don't, definitely. You bring in all kinds of salt, garlic.
I'm never going to shut up. You know that.
I know. But what I want to say here to you, Dave Zed, is I think you have a fantastic show. I really enjoy your videos. It's always time well spent. And it's, like I said earlier, it's a deep pleasure to meet you. So why don't you just tell us, bring us into the loop. And when I say us, I mean the audience out there that may not know who you are. Bring us into the idea and the thought form of who are you, Dave Zed?
Sure. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here, and I'm really happy to be here this evening with the both of you. If I may start from the beginning with starting the podcast, leading into what I've gotten into now. Approximately about 2 years ago, if not maybe a little more than that. Initially, when COVID, I'd say 2.5 years ago, when COVID had first hit, the first few months of 2020, when everyone was not working and everyone was getting these opportunities to stay home and all of that, I said to myself, I looked around at the time. Now, granted, fast forward to today, things have certainly changed. But at the time, I looked around and in the paranormal, extraterrestrial sort of conspiracy field, and I said of podcasters, and I said, there's some very good shows out there, but there were very few that seemed to, at the time, have this possibility of allowing to make speculations and correlations between the paranormal and the extraterrestrial kind of concept of things without doing it in a way with saying, oh, this is what they're doing and this is how they're doing it. So in other words, for me, it was more about creating a show that was exploring ideas. Now, with that said, a lot of those types of shows have come to fruition and have been birthed and manifested since then. But what happened from there was, after about 1.5 years of doing the show and doing members Zoom calls and members only episodes, and of course public live streams and all of this, I said to myself, basically, after essentially looking back without realizing at the time, I was harnessing and utilizing the show as a form of a self-educating tool as well, with respects to the research we do both on the public and private level. And so there came a point where I said to myself at about 1.5 years ago, if not a little bit more than that, I said, why don't I just try and it's a big feat, but why don't I just try and build some type of electrogravitic or anti-gravitic or something of this type device? I said, I might as well give it a shot. And because it seemed like there were these tidbits that were particularly on the dark web, in which were much more covered on our Patreon, where it seemed like this stuff was a lot more simpler than many people may think. As massive machinery wasn't required and all of that. So fast forward, with about, I'd say, $2,000, maybe a little bit more than that, between some trips to the hardware store, ordering some very specific parts and pieces off of Amazon and what have you. At the time I was in an area in Canada where there was a lot of open land. I said to myself, okay, let me try and just see if something happens. So between that and then I guess I'll say it publicly, I think for the first time on your guys' show, decoupling a transformer off of the street, like the transformers on the light posts and all of that. I then made some adjustments to this transformer, hooked it up to the device I had assembled, and turned it on. And then interestingly enough, there was a marble ball on top of the device, and it just went flying suddenly. But Now, before I said, oh my gosh, I did something, I was outside at the time. I thought maybe wind, there was no controlled laboratory condition, or setting. So I brought it inside, and it did the same thing. And then not only that, when I increased the charge of it, it then EMP'd the particular property in which I was staying at. Shortly after that, it probably didn't help that I was about 40 minutes away from a military base, but shortly after that, a couple of jets had flown over. And so what was interesting about all of this was that within a week and a half of those jets flying over, I was emailed and reached out to by people from DARPA. I had some people from the let's say the UAP community or field introduce me to some let's just say very highly respected, high level people at the Department of Defense and all of that. I made some presentations both virtually and in person to some various groups in the DoD. And essentially, for lack of a better description, I'm not claiming I tapped the way. I tapped a set of ways that I will say is not unique. It has been tapped before. It wasn't so much the science that they were interested in, more so as it was the perspective in which I took to then assemble the mechanism with a different type of, I guess you could say, an out-of-the-box understanding, if you will. Now, please forgive me because my intent is not to sound conceited here whatsoever, but since you guys had asked, that's basically what had happened. And from then, what I had done was, without wanting to be, we could say, shut down or quieted, if you will, by various either contractors, subcontractors, or government agencies directly. With some assistance, a little bit of luck, a lot of strategy, was able to coordinate myself into basically starting up my own contracting and consulting company, which is SALT. SAALT stands for Strategic Analysis and Assessment of Longitudinal Technologies. And I've been walking a fine line since then. There's certain things that I definitely can't speak on, but there's a lot of things that I can in a far more non-restrictive manner than others have in the past. So again, I'm not asking anyone here nor am I asking your incredible audience to believe me. I'm simply asking to just be open to what I'm saying. There may be some things down the road that will be announced in which will be taken public, whether via a live stream or on video, to demonstrate some of this. So far, I've only been to laboratories for consulting purposes in which do not allow any, phones to be brought in or anything of the sort. But that's basically the, I guess you could say, not overly detailed, but also not overly brief version of essentially what's been happening. So since then, I've continued the show at the Generation Zed podcast, and what we're trying to do, particularly on the member side, on patreon.com/Generation Zed, is foster a very positive sort of, I guess you could say, a positive egregore, if you will, a positive ripple effect in terms of trying to get people to realize that we don't need to wait on, for example, the government to make an announcement, or we don't need to wait for mainstream science to tell us what, something is or isn't, so to speak. We're trying to foster thinking. We're trying to foster, an uplifting, we could say, sense of community in various fields, in medical healing and propulsion and biophysics, all of that. We have people from academia that have been involved. We have people from your everyday average Joe Blow just wanting to get involved with no background in academia, which is, the way I work personally, I don't care about your background. I care about how you are as a person. If you have heart and you have will, that's much more important to me than anything scientific or anything logical or what have you. So one of the things I can tell you is that it is of my opinion that what you'd call physics, metaphysics and physics, the world of the very large and the world of the very small, are intertwined or intercorrelated when tapping this underlying fundamental energy that amongst various ways to activate this energy, whether it's with liquids or magnets or certain types of different kinds of particle accelerators, you name it, does induce not only a gravitational shielding effect, but also a gravitational propagation effect as well. So there's more than one way to skin this cat, so to speak, and we're particularly on the member side, where we do multiple Zoom calls per week where we have discussions about this, and not just experiments. We do thought experiments, so it's not just physical stuff as well. We have people interested in various different areas of things, and that's I'm very grateful, but that's where it's ended up at the moment.
Very cool. That's fascinating. I just had I had a question. I didn't want to interrupt you. Was how was it that they found out that you did that?
Knowing what I know now,
Yeah.
there are detectors all over the planet
Well, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
that whether it's in low Earth orbit or whether it's literally within these military installations, I can tell you that once you know what to look for and once one understands this not just electromagnetic and not just gravitational aspect of things, you can detect it very easily and build devices specifically to detect them. So you can get spikes in certain areas of a geographical vicinity, the same way you would get a spike on any other kind of radar, basically.
Shit.
I've also, if I may say as well, that I can show you guys to a degree privately because there's secrecy orders on them, but I'd filed patents as well, and there aren't secrecy orders on all of them, but on some. So in other words, they know what to look for.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. They must have detectors somewhere. That's really wild that they're.
Yeah. Yeah, they do have. I mean, the reason I say this is because one of the proposals to the DoD guys was I said, hey, I got an idea for a patent to detect this stuff, and I before they even said anything, I said, you guys have it. I was like,
of course they have it.
Yeah, so I said, who am I kidding? So,
Yeah, that's just wild. So, I mean, that just in my brain just went poof, because if that's true and they have it, then almost every quote unquote UAP UFO thing that's not an orb or that looks mechanical, put it that way, is probably military.
I'd say 70 to 85% are ours.
And then I think the rest are organic. It's kind of my little theory.
I have my own theories as well on that. Unless I have the data, I won't say for certain. So I can just tell you it's just my opinion. But my opinion is that it's a combination. And to be clear to your audience, I'm not saying this in order to check off all the boxes indirectly, but I'm of the humble opinion based on some of the things I've seen exhibited in various laboratories across the U.S. that some of them are from what you'd call an inner Earth, so to speak, if you will,
underground civilization.
Yes, some of them are, in fact, our ancestors that just broke away and literally went underground, but not deep enough to a deeper layer within the planet. I also think we're looking at a sort of interdimensional and / crypto-terrestrial scenario.
Yeah.
In terms of extraterrestrial, I want to be careful with that word because it implies it's loaded, and it's got this, in my opinion, stigma that implies that these little green beings hopped into a disc-shaped craft and came from Proxima Centauri over here. I wouldn't necessarily phrase it that or put it that way. I could be wrong though, but I think without a shadow of a doubt, there's been a presence here for thousands of years that is not directly human, at least genetically.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. I agree too.
That's my take.
And I was talking about this last night to somebody, how the U.S. government federally treats. There are two distinct legal terms: extraterrestrial and alien.
Right.
Are two distinct terms, and that. Whenever I think about that, I think about like the flat earth theory, that there's extra land beyond our pond, so to speak, right? And if our pond is Terra, as we call it,
right?
Beyond here would be extra Terra or extraterrestrial. So that could be why there's this legal distinction. And I could totally pull up to that idea that Alpha Centauri is merely another pond in whatever we're on.
That's honestly, Jerry, that's a very good way of putting it, in my opinion. I would agree with you.
Yeah. So, I mean,
it's sort of like if we think of an onion, for example, or even for those that have watched his Dark Materials, particularly the introduction, where there's these different strings of resonant layers, and each string, once you zoom in, similar to an experience on psychedelics, is fractal, and is not only fractal, but is a whole world in and of itself. And then when you zoom out again, there's a whole other set of strings, and they're their own worlds too. So I don't know if we'd call that interdimensional or extraterrestrial, to your point, Jerry. Exactly.
I call them adjacent realities.
Yeah, that's another one too. Yeah. Exactly.
They just exist in a different frequency
Right.
type, some different something, some different vibration and frequency that we can't perceive,
Right.
nor can they
Right.
perceive us. Otherwise, we'd all crash and it would be bad.
Right. Exactly. That gives rise to like the multi-worlds theory, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think, I don't know, right? It's my opinion that those other things are actually real.
Mm.
You know.
Yeah.
they're not like dream worlds or anything.
No. You're talking about physically when awake, materially real in terms of, yes, I would agree. Yeah. I would say this is one thing, if you can give me a minute to sort of vent my concerns in terms of not that it matters, but with respects to mainstream science, when it comes to quantum physics in particular, one of the reasons I try my best to not use the word quantum a lot is because it's such an esoteric word. I mean, we can talk about how it's the smallest quantization or quantifiable piece of information structure at the most subatomic molecular scale, that it was named coined by Max Planck in
Planck
the
scale.
Planck scale, exactly.
Yeah.
Coined in the early 1900s. But the reason that ticks me off is because I know for a fact that the same people, in many regards behind the scenes and even publicly, certain figures in certain communities, let's just leave it at that, the ones that say that this stuff is not possible, even certain scientists that say this stuff is not possible, are the same scientists that are in a classified setting working on the stuff they said publicly is BS.
Yes.
That's what gets me ticked off. And one of the reasons I decided to continue the show is because yes, it's very easy to a very small degree. I can understand why this has been kept secret. This underlying knowledge, if you will, has been kept secret for quite some time, simply because the device that I had vertically was a gravity propulsor, horizontally would become a coil or a railgun, and it would also be an EMP gun. So I can see why all it takes is one or two people to crack this stuff, and then you're putting guns out of business. But at the same time, I don't think that is justification to keep this stuff quiet either. So
you don't want everyone building railguns in their garage.
Right. So what I'm trying to do particularly on our Patreon is get to know the people, get to know the members that come on and sign up during our Zoom calls and all that. And they don't have to attend those Zoom calls. There's still the content side of the show as well, but get to know them, see what their interests are, all that kind of stuff, and then from there see what they'd be interested in working on with respects to improving themselves. And then by improving themselves, you begin to attain more of a moral and ethical responsibility. So when it comes time to my potentially divulging down the road the secret sauce of this stuff, it would be to people in which I'm able to feel comfortable with and all of that. So trying to walk that line as best I can. Right now, unfortunately, there are certain legal restrictions put in place where I would just, so
I understand. I totally get it.
So that's where I come from as well. That's my perspective to give you
that's awesome.
Idea. So
you reminded me of something back when we were talking about the strings, like the whole idea of dust and the realities and all that from his Dark Materials. And I read those when I was a kid.
Oh, nice.
There's this weirdo named Tim Refat who claims he's a black magician, and he bases all of his magic on quantum mechanics. So he's got a whole mathematical model in which he operates, right? Through the use of crystals and his knowledge of quantum mechanics and all that.
I can tell you, but just very quickly, if I may, certain types of quartz crystals and quantum mechanics become, even in the laboratory, indiscernible from what our ancestors called magic, in my opinion.
I agree. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with this. I wanted to get the point. One of the things he has said in one of the interviews I saw was that he calls himself, I don't know if he calls him dark magician or black magician, whatever he calls himself, magician. He says that what people don't realize is that what a black magician does best is remote view an alternate reality, an adjacent reality, and then shift himself into that timeline. And what he does in life is shift between timelines that are more favorable because he can remote view because he's psychic and all this. I thought that was an interesting concept. So, I mean, if it's possible to do that, it's possible for anyone to do it.
I want to watch my words here, but
I'm sorry.
I would no. I would very strongly agree with him.
Oh yeah. I do too. I wasn't I'm sorry. I didn't mean to put it up like, what do you think of this?
Oh no. I have to. It's just because of there's certain things I want to say out of excitement, but at the moment I can't for legal reasons. Yeah, in other words, I want to be able to say things that help materially substantiate this more than just, say, for example, a remote viewing or dream experience. Not that they're any less real than the physical,
correct.
But yeah.
Correct. Yeah. He's an interesting guy. His whole thing is about the way I visualize it is that he creates a conduit between two, how can I put it? One of the things he does is like take energy, life energy away from people through his crystals and through Counterspace, through this, he calls it the negative I. He uses it's all based on imaginary numbers. Right, on the constant I and minus I. So in this minus I space, which he calls the hell space, he makes a conduit or some kind of pipeline to the normal space, right, and sucks energy out of people. or pushes energy to them. Yeah.
That could be done. I mean, I'm only familiar with that type of stuff in the form of what they've called direct energy apparatuses and all that kind of stuff, but I mean, I wouldn't rule it out at all. I just, it's really interesting stuff, and all of his videos are gone from YouTube, and the archives that I had on my hard drive are all gone. Wow. But anyway, if you can find some of his stuff, it's real interesting. And
I'm sorry to go off on that weird tangent.
No, that was good. I have a question in this query that we're in. So if Dave, if you could put forward what your ideas of Counterspace are so we can get on the same page with that, that would be great.
Sure.
And how is it different from hyperspace? Okay.
Well, this is where it gets, if you guys could define for me, if that's all right, what you know Counterspace to be defined as.
It's the dielectric space.
Then it's of my humble opinion that space and hyperspace would be the same thing.
Okay. Do you have a different opinion of what Counterspace is?
No. And the reason is because the elements that seem to be coming from Counterspace are what's needed to induce the extraction of potentials from hyperspace.
Right. Oh, from hyperspace. So it's a third space, Counterspace. It's in your model.
In my model, Counterspace would be what's needed to tap or open the door to hyperspace. Okay. They'd be sort of like opening the doorknob of the door to the ether.
I see it as a crack. And
right.
For me, it's involved with an acceleration or a deceleration, but mostly an acceleration element that allows one to engage in it, or engage in it, slip through it, if one will.
I would agree very strongly. With
in this
deceleration.
So I want, before we get too far ahead, with what you and Jerry are saying, also just to bring us into possibly the dangers of this work, how many have you had troubles come to your door besides what you introduced to us a little bit briefly that didn't sound like full-on troubles, but what kind of danger elements here?
Well, first, let me say that it is of my understanding and opinion that certain elements of behind the scenes landscape have changed in the last 5 years to provide not necessarily a scenario where we're going to see some type of announcement or anything of the sort, but where there's a window of opportunity for people like myself and others to try and bring some of this stuff out in a very methodical, strategical, but open manner. With that said, I can tell you that this year things have certainly lightened up, but last year there were death threats via phone calls. A couple times I have a very strong feeling certain I guess you could say private contractors were tailing me. For example, I'd go on a walk or whatever, various forms of harassment and things like that. But by that point, I had developed relationships with certain individuals, not just within the North America, but around the world, to the point where it was it didn't bother me, so to speak. But I also was not naive, because there have been others in the past, colonels, lieutenants, what have you, that broke their NDAs and tried to warn about this. So in other words, yeah, there have been. I'm not going to lie to you. You do have to have a thick skin, a pretty thick skin. There have been in-person death threats. There was one point where someone tried to they got the wrong house, but take a picture of my place of residence in an attempt to scare me, things like that. But like, as I said, with all that in mind, there is a window of opportunity, particularly within the last year, where there are certain people that want to see some of this stuff come out.
Excellent. Yeah, I figured as much, and
Yeah.
I can commiserate with some
I
of
could tell
that.
you right now that I will be very honest with the both of you and your lovely audience. I'm not married, nor do I have children. So if, again, I say this purely out of kindness, but if this may be something one may want to consider and or reconsider, if wanting to go into the thick of this with a family, because I hate to say it, but I feel I must be honest that they will, when I mean they, I mean certain elements of private industry and the military industrial complex, they will go to extensive lengths to do whatever they need to do to ensure that their intellectual property is not revealed to a large degree.
Yeah, I agree, and I have put out similar warnings to people that have families. I don't either, and I've had the same level of troubles, and
So
directly at my house, and all kinds of bad, terrible things. So when we're looking at this level of moving forward, and I do believe, and I just want to use the word believe, that there are many people out there, many factions, many organized groups at the very least, that want to see this all come out and want to start moving this forward. However, the way I've been noticing it, Dave, is that I feel like that is still a smaller group of people or organizations or force, if you will, than what is currently controlling all this. And here's where the woo comes in, which is what I love. I think that we're dealing with a lot of, if not almost exclusively, non-humans when we start getting into these areas. Now, you notice I didn't say extraterrestrials.
I would completely agree with you if you were to go up the chain, if you will, to the people, the select group of individuals that are in the know and who they're reporting to. It is of my very humble opinion that they are reporting to beings in which we would consider non-human. Yeah. I would say to a very large degree as well, a lot of events that occur on the surface of our material reality are the result of ripple effect events from potential other realities or densities of this reality, if you will.
And so also when we're looking, I've got so much stuff going on in here.
That's that whole idea that things manifest here out of energetic patterns in other dimensions. I've heard that before, like people talking about doing energy work in the astral plane, for example, and have it manifest here with the right skill set. So yeah, that's interesting.
If I may as well, one of the things that when it comes to this idea of propulsion and all of that, it's of my opinion that an anti-gravity device, or whatever we want to call it, electrogravitic, gravitomagnetic, all these different terms, these anti-gravity devices,
non-combustion engines,
right? Plasma combustion, all this kind of stuff. And as I think I've said, there's more than one way to skin this cat. But at the end of the day, what we're looking at here is a replication of what our bodies already do organically. And I really do mean that in
Yes,
terms of
yes, yes.
the beating of the heart, the chakras of the human body.
The autonomic.
Yes, there's a complete and direct correlation with not just the ancient Mesopotamians and Egyptians, but also with other ancient cultures trying to literally leave the answers on the walls, like drawing it out. We find that we see a lot of geometry and quantum field theory and quantum mechanics directly aligns and is quote unquote eerily coincidental to what our ancestors have drawn on the walls of either the Egyptian Ankh or the infinity symbol or the squatting man on the cave drawings, which is eerily identical to how plasma fluctuates. So, you know, there's that stuff that's kind of just been ignored by the mainstream. And then again, I think what we see in terms of not just UAP or UFO or even paranormal stuff or any high strangeness, even everyday things, I think are a direct result of some type of ripple effect, but energetically, both materially and non-materially, of an overall apparatus that is that can behave and be modeled electrically. But that's just my opinion.
So with this idea, and I'm sorry, Jer, I just had to get this in.
That's okay.
With what you're seeing right now, what we are actually observing in the realm around us right now, and I want to just put in quotes here, like the crazy, and how everything seems extra or hyper or cartoonish, how there seems to be some sort of retro causality going on, and a backward stitches in time, if you will. How are you in your language? How are you making how are you parsing this out? And I'm looking for your opinion here more than anything, because I already know, because I listened to you, how well informed and how deep into this you are.
Oh, well, first off, thank you. I'm honored. I appreciate it. In my opinion, since you've asked for my opinion and not, you know, just what the data's showing, and please know my opinion is also based on experiments and data that I can't show whatsoever, even for my members.
But that's what I'm saying. It's a well-informed opinion.
I see. Thank you. I think our intent at a mass scale is what's driving this in terms of people are now beginning to question things, and they're saying, okay, hold on, the media is saying one thing, but my eyes tell me something different, literally. And with that said, I think what we're seeing as well is this, when people see, for example, they talk about, you know, seeing birds or planes being frozen midair and all of that. To me, that makes perfect sense with respects to the idea that, again, I use these words carefully, but we may be living in a morphogenic fractal hologram or simulation, if you will, and that this hologram or simulation, just like a video game, renders the reality or loads it up, so to speak, based on your perception. And every single one of us are living in our own realities, but everything is stemmed back to a source or a server, if you will. I call it personally consensus harmonics, because of the resonant oscillations of the parameters of any type of material. I think basically our intent is beginning to cause a rupture and a ripple effect that in a way is, whether it's, again, nothing to do with anything high strangeness, but even if it's, for example, I don't know, let me just think of something here, the trucker protest in Canada a year and a half ago or a year ago, things like this. People are saying, no, we don't, either whether they're consciously realizing it or not, there's a lot of people that are coming into themselves in a spiritual regard, in my opinion, because they're starting to say to themselves, well, I have all the material belongings that society has said I should have, and I, you know, mortgage paid off, kids, you know, family, all this kind of stuff, but internally I'm still not happy. So what's missing? And I think what we're missing there is that intuitive, stochastic, heuristic approach that is called spirituality. It's just now being rebranded as quantum and attempted to be merged in a non-organic regard with something I personally don't agree with more synthetic, artificial apparatuses that I'm more into. Let's work with nature rather than against it. So I don't know. Sorry if that answered your question or not, but yeah.
Yes. Oh yeah. That is. And it gets to, now I'm not on your Patreon, so I've only had the pleasure of what you will put out in public. However, what you just said is something I have been very keen to say and observe. And this is what it is that, and I'm going to use it in terms of how things are proceeding right now with say a revelation type thing, not a religious aspect to it, but just the revealing of information or a disclosing of information.
An apocalypse.
Well, not so much that, a revealing.
That's what apocalypse means.
I'm thinking of a revealing, like a revelation of revealing. So anyway, moving forward, I think that this is going to be in everyone's personal language. So as we move forward, these experiences are actually interfaced with your own set of symbols, your own language, your own experience of what the collective of what is going on in the outer world, so that it's going to look different from the person right next to you and the next person. And I think that this is a way of I think this is part of what they're calling disclosure, because what's coming forward needs to interact with every consciousness that's out there. And so it's not going to come in and speak in all English when there's a million other languages.
And neither perspective is right or wrong, if I may add, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah. It's a neutral space. But the thing is, it's going to cause this to be some fuckery, is that I can say, come forward, and I'm just hypothesizing here, and say, whoa, I've just had this amazing experience. And then the next person will totally disagree with me. They had a whole different experience. And what I'm getting here is that it's not going to be cohesive, but the thing that's cohesive is that something has happened. There's been a shift or a change in the energy in the realm, and that will be the only thing people can agree on. And then we're in a new space.
I agree with you in the sense that I think there are a lot of people, this is my opinion, need to come to the understanding after a particular point in time in the upcoming years that perhaps the observation of seeing different things than others is by definition the agreement of coexistence, if that makes sense. This notion, for example, that when you look at, let's say all three of us right now, say we're driving in a car, and say Niche sees, we all see a craft of some type in the same coordinate geographically in the sky, but Niche sees a square, a cube craft, and Jerry sees a triangle, and I see the traditional disc shape, if you will. None of us are neither right nor wrong. This goes back to, for example, Schrodinger's cat and all of that. And I think, unfortunately, we are currently residing on the surface of this planet with a myriad of shit shows going on, conducted by various elements that are continually trying to fight a battle that they're not going to end up winning, in my opinion. And if I may say, when people talk about, for example, well, they say, oh, it's the Age of Aquarius. Well, to me, when people say that very kindly, it's very much like when people use the word quantum. Okay, what the heck does it mean, so to speak, right? So the Age of Aquarius, to me, from a scientific perspective, would be if we think of, for example, sleeping in an apartment in New York City in the middle of winter with the window open overnight as you're sleeping. Are you going to feel the cold coming through the window if you have just one blanket on? Or are you going to feel it more if you have, say, 5 layers of blankets on? You're obviously going to feel it more if you only have 1 layer on, right? I would liken the layers of those blankets to frequency densities in our reality. And so everything is cyclical, and there comes a point where there's going to be an increase in thickness and expansion, and then a decrease in the thickness, and then an increase in the negentropy of that. So you have your expansion and contraction, if you will, which also, by the way, if you were to look at that in a visual regard, forms the caduceus. Yeah.
And the double helix.
Double helix, which is our DNA strand, which is also, in my opinion,
allegedly.
This is also my opinion, the propagation of what a gravity field would look like if you were to get it going. And
there's talk that there's a whole other strand that's not in this dimension too. Like, I've heard that too. I would say there is. I would say there's a third strand down the center. And I think that third strand is the interconnection between
not just developing anti-gravity, but literally everything else. And that's why if you look, for example, Leonardo da Vinci, Nostradamus, Newton, you look at a lot of these guys back then, a lot of them were allegedly, they were not just mathematicians or scientists, they were also alchemists, they were philosophers, they were, authors. And it is of my opinion that is because they understood that underlying geometry and that knowledge at, the Planck scale, quantum scale, at the magical scale, whatever you want to call it, that allows you to, for lack of a better description, become awakened and enlightened to see that everything around us by definition is the I guess you could say is the arguably matter. It would be what our ancestors called magic, and I say that very lightly, but that's been thrown out there before.
Well, sure. I mean, okay, so if we can believe atomic theory, if that's actually true, right? Nothing is real. Nothing in front of us is real. We never touch anything physical. We're interacting with the electromagnetic field surrounding that energy field itself, and it takes on different forms based on its vibrations, etc. So, I mean, whatever. And that makes sense why you would see different things, because different energy patterns will register differently in your brain and make you produce a vision, because you're not seeing what's in front of you. Your brain, there's like 2 nanosecond delay. There's some crazy delay where your brain is assembling the visuals for the frequency and vibrations it's currently receiving. Right.
And I would say that if one were to look at the academic literature of chemistry, physics, engineering, you name it, prior to World War I, not what someone wrote about the papers, but if one could somehow find the original source papers of the late 1700s, 1800s, going till about 1920, you'd find that the academics of their time were basically already successfully conducting what we now call currently quantum experiments, but they didn't call it quantum. They considered the ether or the vacuum or empty space, which is, in my opinion, not really empty, as being real, more real than any material object, to your point, Jerry. And also what's interesting about it is that they called it that and they considered it such until World War I, and then things started to change. You had a bit of the residue, you had the airships, you had the the Tartar stuff, but then once World War II came, even during the years of World War II, I have some footage of some cancer cells being like zapped out and healed, and then some other slides of cancer cells being healed in different ways, being able to take the cell from a point in time back to a point in time when it was once healthy. And the way it's done is by using the vacuum or empty space, if you will, but then it all just went quiet after World War II, almost as if there was a reset, if you will. And interestingly enough,
1947 is when it happened.
Right. And interestingly enough, it's been studied that human behavior can be modeled electrically and can be predicted on a grand scale, whether it's human behaviors of a city or a town or a stock market or you name it. But it also only takes allegedly 2 generations to completely wipe the memory of a particular population.
Yeah,
so
that's obvious.
Yes.
I mean, and if I may say, Jerry, I think what you're alluding to are the papers of Dean Radin, when you had said the 3 nanosecond delay.
Perhaps I've heard it from other places too. I mean,
yes, as well as Diana. I think her name is Diana Didulo out of Lockheed Martin, and Dr. James Giordano out of the European Human Brain Project, with respects to.
This is why I love you, Dave.
With respects to what's called an oscillatory theory of consciousness, so like non-linear or quantum.
Cliff, you ever who Cliff High is?
Oh yeah.
So Cliff's got this theory, this oscillating universe theory too, that blinks on and off. I forget 2.8 trillion times a second. And then there's frames generated that basically every time it goes off, there's nothing, and then it comes back.
Well, if I may say 2 things to that. For example, there's some work from the 1980s by Hochberg and Visser, which showed that the throat of a wormhole, so to speak, and the reason I bring this up is because there's been postulations that we may be within a black hole, wormhole, you name it, a sort of transition. Dyson sphere, right? Exactly. The throat of the wormhole is all that's needed to understand the rest of it, because once you at the Planck scale, you can then use Pythagoras' 2-to-1 ratio to scale it out from there, which also induces the the 5 spins inwards, 7 spin outwards vortex. But not only that, if you look, for example, at even what was it again? The shoot, I lost it, but I'll get it.
So
Sorry, I haven't stopped the last couple weeks, so I've
no worries. It's awesome. It's great, just a great chat. That idea about reversing the aging of a cell and Counterspace made me think of this dude. I forget his first name. Something Anderson, Dr. Anderson, who apparently has a device. He calls it a time travel device that can age and de-age organic matter.
Well, I can tell you that I have some slides that from the Air Force that I really shouldn't have, that I had presented to the DoD guys as well, that kind of spooked them a bit, which discussed during the World War II and afterwards a device where, for example, if we're thinking of a Mobius strip or topology in general, a Mobius strip could in fact fluctuate appropriately without any we could say loss of generality and full coherence if there was a third time derivative or fourth dimension implemented. So what I'm trying to say here is basically, if we think of this idea that we have a stack of books, book number 1 all the way up to 10. Arguably, normally it would be infinite, but I'll use that example here. Say we are residing on book number 10 in our reality, if you will. If there was a point in which, say, book number 5 had a healthy cell that on book 10 is now cancerous, could we extract the potential from the ether, the vacuum, hyperspace, you name it, to then bring it to the present time? So you have literally within a second completely rectified and cured your own cancer. And Antoine Prior was actually doing this with the funding of the French government. And then I believe the Americans came in and shut it down, but he was healing people on a big coil with plasma filled above a bed, and he would heal them. And unfortunately, as I understand it at the time, talking to people far smarter than myself, he didn't fully get how he was doing it, but he knew he was healing them. And the reason he didn't fully get it was because he did not fully have at the time, there was not a coherent understanding of what you'd call nonlinear optics. So, and what that would be if we say have a glass prism, whether it's a cube or a pyramid, doesn't matter. Say we take a regular laser beam and we shoot the beam through the prism. As the beam goes through the prism, it is being, once the initial photons go through the beam, there is a kinetic absorption and then emission and then reabsorption, re-emission, et cetera. So that speaks to the ideas, right? That also speaks to the infinity symbol, because this idea of, well, okay, if we look, for example, at Dr. Hal Puthoff's polarizable vacuum model, we see that the particle fluctuations generate the fields generate the particles to fluctuate. And so it's like putting a microphone to a speaker and getting a nonstop squeal. It's a cosmological feedback system in a toroidal geometry. So
does that affect the tightness of the mitochondria, how tight it's wound, as opposed to loose? Oh God, I can't remember how this all goes. But for some reason, I think that the better the longevity, the better the health, the better the healthier the actual genes of organism is. It's the tighter the mitochondria is wound within its
there are correlations, and I say this because when you look at the immune system, one can make a strong argument that the immune system in and of itself acts as its own organ, and that if people have talked about the Akashic records, if you will, there's something within our genetics that I have to be careful with what I'm saying here, but in what may or may not be called junk DNA that stores all and every event, thought, feeling, action that you have taken, and it stores it within this library, if you will, that can be tapped genetically. So that's why when people say, for example, well, if how do I put it? Others in the past have said, well, if a certain race, regardless of where they're from, a certain species more advanced than us, were doing tests or experiments on some of us, or over a prolonged period of time, at least as we perceive time, over hundreds or thousands of years, where would you put it? Some people have thought, well, in a mountain or in something very well, I'd put it in the genes. because they're the most
Yes.
likely to survive.
Yeah.
So
And see, and so the mechanism I'm talking about is not the telomere either. That's separate, and I wish I could get to it. So with this idea, though, is it possible to rewrite organically and naturally and not synthetically like is being done, or through the idea of, say, counterspace and how that function works, the dynamics of that function, rewrite the script? I guess my question here is, how finite is this experience we're having, and how hard is it to actually rewrite this coding?
Is it immutable? Is the question.
I don't know that is it immutable, but I hear you.
That is a niche. That is a great question. Well, I can tell you that at least as I have been briefed on, and as I understand it, and one of the reasons that this wasn't said, this wasn't instructed to me to be something to keep quiet, is because to many it sounds so crazy that it doesn't matter. But when one goes up that food chain, or that ladder, if you will, of trying to really get to the core of everything, what we're looking at is something that even Dr. Niels Bohr had said in 1914, I believe, when he said, if one doesn't realize that everything that we call real are made up of things that are inherently and entirely non-real, then one hasn't understood quantum physics yet. And so I think when we go up that ladder to sort of the source of this potential immutability or not, we're looking at something completely non-physical that is attempting to, I hate to be like this, but I also want to be honest in the best way that I can, that is possibly using us for food, or as food.
You're right where I was at. That's exactly what I was.
I say that,
to get at.
I say that not happily. There's some evidence I've seen to strongly suggest that may be the case, and I don't lose sleep over it. But it's kind of like, do cattle know that they're going to get slaughtered in a handful of days? It's the same, right? You don't know what you don't know,
right? But this is where my research and evidence has been going, and I've been trying to put this forward, not to scare people, but to make people aware that this is a potential. And also, so I just want to piggyback on that. What do you see the role of fungus and molds and spores playing in this whole phenomena, the whole thing?
Oh, I got to be honest with you. Anything having to do with plants and biology, I think, is a direct representation of the answers that we're all looking for. And what I mean by that is basically, this may be an oversimplification, but when people talk about, how can we develop anti-gravity, or how can we develop something for healing people, or how can we develop, open up a portal or a Stargate or something, the fungus, the plants themselves, nature's been trying to show us and give us the answer. Like it's right in front of our eyes. Now, also, not only that, but they're fractal, and that's not a fluke either. I think fractality is a very significant part of all of this, because it also stems back to Pythagoras' 2-to-1 ratio. And also, not only that, but this idea of what's been called and known as the Egyptian Ankh, because we see, for example, 2 are stemming from 1, and that's your Y, so to speak.
Yes.
Not only that, but there have been some that have postulated that, and I have to, again, forgive me, I have to watch my words here, that the Cartesian plane, scientifically and mathematically, the X and Y axis, are not all that there is. There's a third one, which is there may be a Z axis, right? And that may speak to this idea of our third DNA strand. This may speak to the idea of 0-point energy. When you take X and Y axis and you sum them to 0, a new, just like when 2 people come together to give birth to a child, a new form of energy is born from that. And so I strongly agree with that. I can definitely speak publicly on the fact that electromagnetic inductance in the laboratory generates gravity from that. So electricity and magnetism, the divine masculine, the divine feminine, form an entirely new energy from that topologically. And that's what I think plants, fungus, all of that, I think, is a direct representation of that.
So I've had a very similar opinion on all that too. Ever since I first heard about waveforms canceling each other out.
Mm-hmm.
that whole idea never made sense to me, because if so, like a sound wave is just an ether perturbation as far as I'm concerned, right? It's just
Right,
a movement of the medium, and your ears pick it up as whatever. So that movement, that energy of that movement can't possibly cancel something out, but it could shift at 90 degrees into a different form, just like you said. So that was my whole understanding. Yeah. So I've heard that described as scalar energy.
Could be.
Yeah. I mean,
unfortunately, I can't comment on that.
No, I know. I'm just saying, well, I don't know that, but I'm just saying that in the past, I've heard that talked about as being scalar energy, this energy that goes 90 degrees from the third dimension of energy, if you will.
Some have called it a third time derivative.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to just go.
Yeah. No, it's cool.
So
go ahead.
What about, let's look at this new race of people coming in. So we talked about earlier, it takes 2 generations basically, and you've got a new world. And as far as if there's a program and if you're trying to restructure everything, it doesn't take very long, especially if you move the elders out. And so, or get control of the young ones. But there's something different going on. And I could point my fingers in a lot of different directions. I think all of us could, and we don't need to go down those corridors at the moment. Something is different in the sauce, and we know that there is something different in the sauce. And so therefore, with the world that these new beings are being brought into, that is very separate and very much different from the world of not very long ago, that is more digital, that is more what I'm seeing is the emergence of something new. And this is like a new being we are encountering. Again, to me, the idea of a human is like a car. I'm driving a human car, a vessel that is technically Homo sapiens sapien, but a lot of things are in them. So what do you think about this new, and I'm just calling it species, coming in just kind of colloquially so people understand that it's different from what I guess we are?
If we're looking at it from an organic sense, which is the route that I prefer to take most avidly than anything else, then great question, by the way. Your line of thinking is identical to mine, I must say. Then I would say that, for example, instead of what has been called humankind, perhaps we could consider humans kind, or humankind, if you will. That's why in some cases there have been alleged reports of, alleged quote unquote ET, but then, leaked medical reports showing that their genetics seem to have some human percentage within them. And it's like, whoa, they allegedly don't look like us at all, much bigger, much taller. So this speaks to the idea as well of you could say, a propagation of cohesion across the universe, in the sense that there's an underlying consistent interrelation that we all have with one another. Now, in terms of, if I may ask, Anish, when you said new being, could you be a little more detailed in what you mean by that?
Well, again, I believe that, so I think we're being altered, and I think that I think we can all agree that we've been altered, that through recent things in the last few years that have been going on, but not just those, by the difference in the air quality, the food quality, the water quality, all this. So there's something structurally changing, and I think it is actually part of the hidden, and this is the woo, the hidden hand that's non-human, to bring in a new species. And I think some people out there might be calling this a reset. There's a whole bunch of language, but something, Dave, something new is coming into the realm, and it's not us.
If I may say, I agree with you very strongly. Actually, I would maybe perhaps take it one step further, in that there are multiple factions of both human and non-human, material and non-material, beings with their intents and agendas for what is going to be coming in the next 5 to 15 years. And we, as you say, we're already seeing it now. Things happening now 2-3 years ago, we never would have thought would be the case, are indeed happening in terms of how ridiculous certain things are getting and all of that. I think we're seeing one angle of that being pushed from a more synthetic AI angle, which personally I will say I'm not for. Now that's just me personally.
I'm with you.
Right. I think we see as well another angle being pushed, which is far more organic, alchemical, and we could say nature oriented. However, I think we're seeing that represented. I think we're seeing a war of those elements, by the way, in real time, and we're seeing what's being reported in the media in some cases as a result of that warring. So I'm much more on the personally organic side of things. Not trying to go against nature or force things to that are not naturally supposed to occur to happen. Regardless, I think just like with everything in life, everything is a cycle, perhaps, and the beings that were once potentially here, whether human or otherwise, that may have not had the best intentions for our species on the surface, may be attempting to project, and I say may be attempting to project strength that they no longer have, but they're attempting to appear that to still have it, but other elements have caught on that they're not as strong as they were, whether human or otherwise. And we're seeing the result of that attempt to I mean, I'll be honest with you guys. You could say that my initiative as well, with what I do on the Patreon specifically, is an attempt to try and get as many people more organically and nature oriented with this new knowledge and science and energy as possible. So that's where I go with that.
And just to bring this all full circle back to the whole intent and consensus reality generates our picture of it, right?
Right.
We talked about earlier. What I am observing lately is the total destruction of consensus across the board.
Yes.
In every possible collective, there is dissent and separation, and no one is on the same page anymore. And I think, so like half of me says that that's being done on purpose. No, I'm sure that's being done on purpose.
Yes.
But I think the outcome of this happening is, and I hate to use this term, but I don't have a better one, an awakening. That people will snap out of it, and it will just backfire on the, I don't want to say perpetrators, the energy that's driving this. How's that?
I think, if I sort of cut you off, I think to your point, Jerry, that the lack of harnessing, understanding, and using, whether we want to call it spirituality or intuition, is what's also causing people to freak out and look externally instead of internally. But that's just my opinion.
No, and that's just another way to put it too.
Right.
You know, what I was trying to say is that, you know, getting back to the idea that there's a layer of control above physical humans, right?
Right.
That and I'm this is front-loaded shit from back like when I got into this in early 2012 or whenever. But this whole idea of some kind of mass consciousness awakening happening, regardless of how that happens.
Right.
Is trying to be staved off by this upper echelon. And I think that's driving a lot of the division in our society now and keeping us all apart.
I absolutely fundamentally agree with you. Cool. And that's, I'll leave it at that. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, no, it's good. I'm glad. I'm happy that other people agree with me.
However, I'm not sure, Jerry, how you put that together, how you hypothesized that, but I would say you're very accurate, man.
I watched a lot of shit. But yeah, no, that's kind of my observation of what's happening today. And I think, my whole philosophy in life has been that reality is going to slap you in the face till you wake up and realize it's trying to talk to you.
Exactly. Oh man, you nailed that. Exactly. And what you just described there is also what some people have also called synchronicities too. So regardless of the label we put on it, it's different paths to the same finish line.
Yes, absolutely.
And there's something trying to stop that. Yeah.
Yeah. So something good's coming. We just have to.
Yep.
We have to make it to that good thing. And you're not the only person who said that to us. I mean, God, who was it? Was that Shane?
Maybe Shane Bells.
Yeah, Shane Bales, I think, was talking about something happening. Now, I don't know about this whole solar event that's supposed to trigger this. I'm not saying that's part of it. I don't think it is, but it could be a catalyst. I don't know.
Unfortunately, I can't go into that.
Okay.
I've got a question. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So I have a whole bunch of great people around me that just track all kinds of shit.
Nice.
And I'm very fortunate for that. And it's not for me. They do it for themselves. I just get to be included in it. And so one of the things that's being tracked is in the last few years, but it's upticking. And I think I saw there's a story that's out right now. So this current story right now is this boy, I'm not sure, in Colorado or somewhere, where he was dead for over 2 hours. And then they found out he's still alive. He woke up and now he's in rehabilitation. He has no brain damage outside of short-term memory. And so this is the latest. And he's in physical rehab and stuff. There's a whole expose on him. Anyway, and they're trying to pawn this off that it was a genetic deformation or something coming down from the mother's line. But the fact is he was dead for over 2 hours, and they're calling it miraculous. But the thing is, there's a bunch of these stories all over the realm. And then recently there's been some stories with animal studies, and I can't remember which lab, it's on the East Coast, that's been talking about bringing back squirrels that were dead for a very long time and reanimating them. And so there's this idea, Dave, that so electricity is obviously involved and magnetism's involved in this. However, I have a 2-point question here. First of all, I don't think the things that are coming back are the things that left. So I don't think the soul that died is the soul that came back.
I'd agree with you.
There's a darker situation going on there. And secondly,
there
are several of these cases. It's not a one-off. This is not anomalous in any which way. And the further back I've started to look in time, these stories have been out there in small little reporting circles that how many of these people you're pronounced dead, you're dead 2 hours, you usually just end up at the morgue or not even thought of at that point. How many people are reanimating at that point, and what's going on there? So it's a kind of that 2-point question there, because I find it concerning, and it plays into a lot of the pop culture narrative that's being fed to the collective.
Yes. It's of my opinion, and I'm in strong agreement with you, Nish, that whomever, whatever is returning is not what was there prior. And the reason I say this is because there is something that is seldom discussed, but is something I can discuss to a degree because of the fact that some of it's come out from being restricted to public in the literature, which is that it's been argued that what we call a soul may in fact be a bioplasmic matrix, if you will, or matrix that resides in the body, but is also non-local as well in what they call, spooky action at a distance or non-locality, which also leads to what Roger Penrose has discussed when he speaks to this idea of when he says he can't describe what consciousness is other than that it is not here in terms of non-local.
It's non-local, yeah.
Right. He can describe what it isn't, but he cannot describe what it is. I would agree very strongly with that. I think that whatever consciousness is, whether induced synthetically or otherwise, this idea, if we follow along that matrix concept, and our bodies being organic computers or laptops or vessels or containers, that I think what is, well, first off, Nish, your question is fantastic. I wish I could do a 6-hour breakdown mathematically and scientifically of everything, like to answer to every detail of what you asked there, because both your questions are incredible. So basically, I think there's so many variables to after a soul, if you will, has been removed from from its vessel or container, that I think what we're seeing here is a very butchered synthetic version, similar to what's the in His Dark Materials, spoiler alert, and near the end of the show, when they go to one of the lower realms that many have considered hell, and basically they're alive but they're also not, in the sense that they're detached from their vessel is detached from their core source, there's whatever you want to call it, soul, star energy, whatever you want to name it. And basically it's this speaks to me as going against nature, so to speak. I think, I apologize, it's difficult for me. I have to watch my words, and also I'm trying to make sure I don't get into all super physics lingo or whatever, but I think that it is something that is very unnatural, something that should not be tampered or played with, and I think that it is being done on behalf of a grander element, to both your and Jerry's point, of something that is trying to resist what is naturally going to be occurring, regardless of any malevolent efforts. Sorry, I hope I answered that question well enough. If not, I can try again.
That just reminded me of the whole soul recycling stories I used to hear, and how that's been stopped. So maybe they're looking for a new way to get it.
There's a lot of different there's a lot of speculation about the different intents behind the scenes of that, and
sure, it's just energy.
But the thing is that it's actually happening. So it's out of the realm of stories, as far as we're getting fed this now from, not from fiction, sci-fi fiction, literature, storytelling. It's actually coming from the other storytellers, the news sources. And that's where it's taken into a deeper layer, or it's gone to the street level. So on the other question here is the dynamics and structure of a bioorganic being being reanimated after a certain amount of time. Like the squirrels, I think they had them in the refrigerator or something. They were reanimating them after like 6 months. Now this is out there, and it's coming through peer reviewed journal.
Yes.
Not that I at this point hold any of that stuff in high regard these days, but it's something they are clearly wanting us to get our collective minds around, this reanimation idea.
There's an angle to that, which is something that, in my opinion, could aid organically in revitalizing a person, if you will. But I also think there's an angle to that in which is very unnatural. And that's why, forgive me, I'm trying to do my best to explain it as simple terms as I can, but there are different branches or avenues one could go down with that. What we're seeing here is a very extended version and potentially unnatural version of the cancer cell example I gave, because at least in the cancer cell case, you are still within your container or vessel, if you will. You're still alive when that's occurring. If you it starts to get complex, in my opinion, because this idea of, for example, there are different proposals that, whether emotionally, intellectually, in other in a thermodynamic sense, the soul, if you will, or the bioplasmic matrix, is comprised of different elements. So if we think of a full pizza and it's got different slices, so in some cases it's been proposed by some of my colleagues privately that basically when some people die, if there's trauma and they're not fully ready for that death in a physical sense to occur, then some of those slices of that metaphorical pizza that represents the soul in this example remain resonantly stuck or attached to a particular geographical vicinity, and then the rest go. So when you're trying to reanimate that, you're like reanimating a butchered pizza that didn't have 12 slices to make the full circle. You're bringing back just a few, and then not the whole thing, and it starts to get really, there's a lot of variables at play there depending on when it was done, how they were stored. It's really, in my opinion, a shit show. That's something that, it's one thing if you're alive and you want to do some type of reverse aging to make the body healthier and to live longer whilst you are still alive. But in my opinion, it's another scenario after you've died, at least, or allegedly, left your vessel, and then all of a sudden 6 months later someone tries to zoop you back in it. I think what we're seeing there is an attempt to showcase that everything is local in the body, which I very fundamentally disagree with.
But
So
they never
wait, are you
they
saying
never
that-
allowed us to think. Sorry, Jerry, I just want to make sure this gets answered in the best way possible without losing the thread.
Going to ruin my joke then.
They never brought things back to life after they've been dead for a certain amount. So no matter how well the cryonics were performed, the fact that they're saying now that they can bring squirrels back 6 months or whatever, and then if you pile onto that all the stuff that's coming forward now from the surface level sciences saying, well, now we've got, we're bringing back woolly mammoth because we now have chewy DNA and all this other stuff that's going on. So it's not even like a soul thing or a consciousness thing. It's actually the physics, the physiology of bringing back bioorganic beings in the same vessel and having them function in a way that has meaning, that they're expressing in a proper way and not just flailing around and then dying again.
Well, if to that point, Niche, the work of Dr. Michael Levin, if I'm not mistaken, off the top of my head, has shown that there's an underlying, I think, electrical substrate or core blueprint to this reality, in which one could take, for example, the blueprint of a cat's head and put it, say, for example, on a human, and that, again, it's not for me to say if that is, I guess you could say, right or wrong per se, but in terms of this idea of, actually, if I may ask you, Nish, to clarify, when they put, for example, these squirrels in the cryogenic containers, if that's the case, or are they doing that, or are the squirrels full on deceased and then they're literally bringing them back, for example, like in the case of the mammoth?
What I'm understanding is, so I don't think they've been cryonically preserved, first of all, and they were deceased squirrels. And there was something that sparked the whole thing. And it's been a while. I remember talking about it. There are, who knows if it's searchable anymore, because there's 3 levels of search now in our new firewall system. But I think that they there was a ground zero for this, that something had come back to life, and that sparked this whole query of, well, can we do this? Is it possible? Now, this is not a new query. We know this, and this is what's generated the whole cryonics movement. But it was, from what I gather in my memory, they were just frozen in a freezer. Now, it is a scientific lab, so perhaps they did take care that there was no water damage, etc. But I don't know the particulars at this point. I just know they were bragging about this, or not bragging. They're excited. Let's put this.
Well, if I may say, it is of my humble opinion that, and forgive me if I'm still misunderstanding, but I think that I would have to know if the bioplasmic matrix within even these animals was still present or not.
Yeah. And see, I don't have that detail for you right now.
Okay, because then that to me would determine from there specifically what they're doing. Are they bringing back what parts of the matrix? What, if at all, was the matrix always there and it stayed there? And so that's for me. I would need to look at some of that data to give you a more concrete answer. I apologize.
No, I respect that. But my point of relevance here was that we went from that, I think last year or 2 years ago, to now the story with the boy coming back to life after being absolutely dead for 2 hours. And they're literally calling it a miracle.
This is when it really gets interesting, because there's so many possibilities, and I'm not saying that from a speculative sense. I'm saying that from even what's been collected data-wise behind the scenes. That, I mean, I'm going to be very honest with you guys here. It's of my understanding that could have been something in a case where his soul had gone to another place, or his bioplasmic matrix had gone to a place temporarily for a personal purpose of his, as we all have our journey, if you will. Then there's another possibility, for example, that there was the revitalization via some type of what's called linguistic wave genetic resonance transference of the basically of the what would be called the boundary conditions of certain type of resonant energies that's within photons that store information structures. There's a lot of possibilities, and so kind of like the I think it was the true story that was then written about, then they did a movie on it, the boy who met Jesus or whatever. And what was interesting about that was that when he had come back to being conscious again from being in the hospital, he said to his parents that he had met certain aunts and uncles who had died before he was born. And so and he described to a T the detail of what they look like, how they spoke, their mannerisms. So in terms of an ethical or moral angle of that, it's tough. It's tough. We're going to need another few hours for that.
I put in our private chat because I don't look at the chat on the live stream, but I just did a fast search and it came up real fast. There's other stuff on it. Anyway, that is interesting because I'm always trying to follow, Dave, the idea of what we're being presented with, say, and I call that pop culture news. Because we're, and you should know this, you do know this, that there's a level of disclosure that goes on and it needs to go on so people can cognitively start to engage with what's unrolling. And this seems to be a narrative that is starting to surface more and more. This is not a singular experience, and it's rather exceptional. We grew up in a world where dead's dead. Right.
This is actually, if I may say, I thank you. I was just looking at the article that you put in the chat here. I think, and I'm not trying to split hairs here deliberately, but I think we also need to come to a collective agreement, not just us three, but being brought back to life. Those terms mean, so to speak, right? Because, for example, again, not to be super specific, but it's like when you go outside, for example, and it's snowing, and you say, okay, well, what's that? Okay, it's snow, but what's snow made out of? There comes a point where you can say, okay, ice, water, but then we just don't know. As even Richard Feynman had said, there's not, if we really look at the problem of what energy is, we don't have an adequate definition of energy. We don't have an adequate definition of force. There comes a point where it's just most of the things, if not all of the things that are listed as givens in science, we don't know what they are. So
where our whole reality is based on theoretic everything.
Right.
So, I mean,
and then anything that gets practically proven that goes against anything that's been publicly stated gets classified immediately. So
same page is important. And that's one of my goals. I know that you have to go.
Oh, yes. Thank you. In a minute or two. Yes.
And so I'm not going to ask another lengthy question, but I hope to be having you in conversation more. This has been just such a great pleasure.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Thank you. So I really want to thank the both of you. I really do appreciate it. And I think the both of you have my email. If you'd ever like to do something down the road, I'd be honored and more than happy. I really like the level of conversation and discussion you guys think at and converse at.
Likewise.
How do people find you? So can you just lead us to your world, Dave?
Sure. Thank you. You can find me on Twitter at PodcastZed, no space, no capitals. You can also find me at youtube.com/Generation Zed, ZED, no space, no capitals. Excuse me, space between Generation and Zed on YouTube, Generation Zed podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And I also have a Substack, davezed.substack.com. But mainly for those that are really looking to get into the nitty-gritty of things, the main stuff is done on whether it's physical actual experiments or members only episodes multiple times per week, and all that would be patreon.com/Generation Zed. All of the funds in which my gracious supporters contribute go to obviously first paying the bills, and after that reinvesting into the show and into experiments in which we do on the member side and all of that. So that's mainly where I could be found. And if anyone is interested, they're more than welcome to email me at genzedpodcast@gmail.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dave. It's been an absolute pleasure. We definitely need to dig in some of these topics some more. Like my brain's on
Thank you
fire
so
right now. I'm
much.
like, I have so many questions, but yeah, not questions so much as I just love to chat about it.
Yes, yeah, I hear you. I hear you.
Cool. Well, thank you, Nish. Thank you, everyone, our lovely audience, except Modwiz. He's not lovely, as he himself said. But thank you. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll be back next week. 2 weeks. We'll be back in 2 weeks with, I think, Solaris is going to be here.
Oh, nice.
So that should be interesting.
Excellent.
Anyway.
Yes. Thank you, everyone out there. And damn, what a nice pleasure this was. This was some, especially in the shadow of Mercury retrograde, we get the amazing Dave Zed.
Gatorade.
Thank you so much.
On an
Thank
eclipse. There was an eclipse tonight.
It's happening
wow.
now.
Groovy,
Yeah.
groovy, we'll say. All right, everyone. Take care. We'll see you in we'll see you in 2 weeks.